Sometimes life changes in less than a minute. In my case, it was in the 20 seconds the elevator took to go up from the first floor to my 7th floor apartment. I got in with my heavy grocery bags, thinking about my granddaughter and the Sunday pot roast I was going to make for dinner. Everything was normal, routine, almost boring, until the elevator stopped on the 4th floor and my new neighbor, Lionel Evans, stepped in. He's a quiet man in his 50s with a soft voice who always greets me politely. But that afternoon, he didn't look me in the eye. His breathing was ragged and his hands were trembling. As the elevator doors started to close again, he discreetly slipped me a small note folded into 4 parts. His fingers brushed mine, and I knew something was terribly wrong. I looked up to ask him what was going on, but he just moved his lips and whispered, "Don't say anything." I opened the note without thinking. It said, "Fake sick and get out of here fast." I froze. My first impulse was to laugh, to believe it was some absurd joke, but then I saw his face, pale, tense, like someone who knows danger is too close. My heart started pounding hard. I didn't understand anything, but something inside me screamed to trust him. I clutched my chest and pretended to be dizzy. "Oh, dear God," I mumbled, swaying and stumbling. "I don't feel well." Lionel pressed the emergency button. The elevator stopped between floors, and with an effort, he managed to pry the door partially open. "Get out, Miss Sterling," he whispered firmly. "Now!" And that's what I did. I scrambled out, trembling, my grocery bags tumbling to the floor. I leaned against the hallway wall as he stayed inside, holding the door. When our eyes met one last time, I knew this wasn't a game. There was genuine fear in his eyes. Before I continue, I want to make a special invitation. Please subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps me see that you support and enjoy my stories. And comment below, telling me what city you're watching from right now. Let's continue. Minutes later, sirens began to fill the street. The noise was coming from the parking garage, and the echo climbed the condo tower's walls. From my window, I saw police cruisers and an ambulance arrive. Neighbors started spilling out of their apartments, alarmed. Someone yelled that the elevator was stuck between floors. Someone else said there was blood. I didn't understand any of it. I wanted to go down, but my legs wouldn't move. I sat down in the hallway, trying to process what had happened. Lionel, the note, the fear on his face. What had he been trying to prevent? What did he know that I didn't? An officer knocked on my door a few minutes later. "Are you Ms. Alara Sterling?" he asked urgently. "Yes, officer. What's going on? Did you know the man who was in the elevator with you?" My heart stopped. What happened to him? He was found deceased when the paramedics arrived. I felt an emptiness in my stomach. Deceased? But I just spoke to him. The officer lowered his gaze. "It appears someone attacked him." I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his look. I thought about that note and how if I hadn't listened to him, I would have been the one left there. I turned on the lamp and opened the note again and again, as if the letters would change. The paper was stained with sweat. On the back, something was written in faint blue ink. "Don't trust anyone in the building." A shiver ran down my spine. How was that possible? I've lived here for over 30 years. I know everyone. Doris from the 5th floor, who's always asking me for sugar, the Peterson twins, who spend all day arguing, and my daughter-in-law Kendra, who lives on the 8th floor with my son. I froze. My daughter-in-law, the same one I'd argued with just a week ago about an old family inheritance. The next morning, the police returned to question me. They wanted to know why Lionel had given me that note. I didn't know what to say. Maybe he was confused. Maybe he thought I was someone else. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. He knew exactly who I was. When the officer left, I was alone in the living room. The elevator was still out of order, and the silence of the condo building was unbearable. I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit around waiting for answers. Lionel had tried to save me for a reason, and if that reason had something to do with someone inside these walls, then I wouldn't rest until I found out why someone wanted me dead in that elevator. The following days were a mixture of silence and whispers. The entire building seemed to breathe differently, as if the walls held the echo of that crime. Doors closed faster, curtains were drawn subtly, and the elevators, once a gathering point for neighbors, had now become a cursed place. Every time I went up or down the stairs, I felt eyes fixed on my back. Some greeted me with fake kindness, others simply looked away. It was as if everyone knew something, except me. The police had visited several times. They wanted to know what had happened between Lionel and me. I told them what I remembered: his look, the note, the fear. The lead detective, a man with a tired face, listened intently. "And you say you didn't know him?" he asked as soon as he greeted me in the hallway. "Interesting," he murmured, reviewing his notebook. "Because we found your name written on a sheet of paper inside his apartment." "My name?" I asked, surprised. "Are you sure?" "Elara Sterling, 7th floor. He wrote it next to 2 other names, but the others were crossed out." I didn't know how to respond. The detective watched me for a few more seconds and added, "Do you know if he had any enemies?" "No," I replied, "but it looks like I do." It was hard for me to sleep that night. The clock marked 2 in the morning when I heard footsteps in the hallway. I got up silently and put my ear to the door. Someone was out there breathing. I felt a knot in my throat. Suddenly something fell. A small white envelope slid under the door. I waited a few seconds before picking it up. It had no return address. I opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a folded sheet of paper and a newspaper clipping. The clipping spoke of the assassination of a businessman involved in a financial scandal. On the sheet of paper, in hurried handwriting, someone had written, "It all started with your husband's inheritance. Don't trust anyone." I let the paper fall. My husband, Marcus Sterling, had died 6 years ago. The inheritance had been a source of arguments with my son and his wife, Kendra. She had insisted on selling the family land, but I had refused. That dispute broke the little relationship we had. What does Marcus have to do with this? I asked myself softly. The next morning, I went down to the building lobby. The neighbors were gathered there like crows over a secret. Doris from the 5th floor looked at me curiously. "Elara, did you hear the news? The man who died in the elevator was an accountant. They say he worked for a woman on the 8th floor. A shiver went down my spine. "The 8th floor?" "Yes, Kendra Reed. Isn't that your daughter-in-law?" I didn't answer. I just nodded, trying not to let the trembling in my hands show. I returned to my apartment with my mind spinning. Lionel, the note, the murder, the accountant. Everything was starting to connect, but I still didn't understand how. That afternoon, I decided to go to my son's apartment. Darius greeted me with a tired smile. "Mom, what a surprise. Come in, please." The house was spotless, as always. Kendra, his wife, appeared a few seconds later, dressed in a silk robe, smiling coldly. "Nice to see you, mother-in-law. To what do we owe the honor?" "I just wanted to know if you heard anything about the elevator incident," I replied, carefully choosing my words. "Terrible," she said, feigning horror. "Yes, that man was my accountant." I froze. "Your accountant?" "Yes, he handled a few things for me, minor stuff, nothing important." She said this while avoiding eye contact. Darius intervened. "Mom, don't start, please." "I'm not starting anything, son. I'm just asking." "Honestly, there's nothing strange about it," Kendra added, smiling. "That man had enemies. I'm not surprised he ended up like that." I left quickly, my heart pounding. I didn't know if it was my imagination, but there was something in her tone, an unsettling certainty, as if she knew more than she was letting on. That night, I went through my husband's old documents. In one of the folders, I found a sheet of paper with a name underlined, Lionel Evans, the same man who had given me the note, and in the margin, in my husband's handwriting, was written, "Tell if something happens to me." My blood ran cold. Lionel knew Marcus. He was looking out for me on my own husband's orders. And Kendra, what part did she play in all this? At midnight, I decided to step out into the hallway. I couldn't sleep. When I reached the elevator, I saw something that chilled me to the bone. The door was open, still showing the dry marks from the day of the crime. On the floor, a small smudge of blue ink, the same ink from the note Lionel had given me. I looked up toward the 8th floor, and for an instant, I could have sworn I saw the shadow of a woman watching me from the hallway above. A tall, still shadow wearing a silk robe identical to Kendra's. I retreated slowly, locked my apartment door, and secured the deadbolt. I sat in the darkness, unable to stop thinking. The note, the clipping, my husband's name, the connection with Lionel. Everything pointed to a truth that was just beginning to emerge. And even though fear paralyzed me, something else grew inside. A suspicion that hurt more than the terror. Because if Lionel had been my protector, then the threat had to come from someone I loved. 3 days passed since the last time I slept well. Since I learned that Lionel Evans' name was written in my late husband's papers, I couldn't get his face out of my mind. That desperate look, that note written in blue ink, that warning that saved my life. It was no longer a coincidence. It was a message that came from the past, a past someone was trying to erase. The entire building seemed to look at me differently. In the elevator, now repaired, no one said a word. Everyone lowered their eyes, pretending they knew nothing. But I watched them. Doris, who spent more time peering through her peephole every day, the Peterson twins, who had suddenly become friendly, almost subservient, and especially Kendra, who feigned cordiality every time I crossed her path, but couldn't hide that nervous glint in her eyes. She knew something. I could feel it. I decided to go to the building maintenance room where the security cameras were kept. I knew the superintendent, Ethan, a quiet, helpful young man in his 20s. When I asked him to show me the recordings from the day of the murder, he hesitated. "I don't know if I should do that, Ms. Sterling." "Look, son," I said in a low voice, "that man saved my life. I just need to understand why." Ethan nodded, closed the door, turned on the screen, and began to play the images. The video showed the 4th floor hallway. Lionel entering the elevator, then me, and then nothing. The recording stopped just before he handed me the note. "See?" Ethan said. "There's a 5-minute cut." And who can access those recordings? Only the building manager, and, well, some owners if they request authorization. Owners like who, for example? Ms. Kendra Reed. My heart skipped a beat. My daughter-in-law? Yes, she requested access 2 weeks ago to check on a supposed theft in her apartment. I didn't say anything. Ethan kept searching through the files and found something else. "Look at this," he said, zooming in on the image. In the 8th floor hallway, barely 1 hour before the crime, Kendra could be seen entering the building with a large black tote bag. 10 minutes later, she was running out. "Could you make me a copy of this?" I asked him. "Of course, but please be careful, ma'am. Not everyone in this building is who they seem." That afternoon, I returned home with the USB stick in my pocket. I looked at it as if it were a ticking bomb, proof that something terrible had been right in front of me without my seeing it. I turned on the computer and reviewed the recording again and again. There was Kendra, her hurried walk, her face hidden behind dark sunglasses, the bag pressed against her body, and something else. As she left the building, she looked up toward my window, fear mixed with anger. If Lionel was connected to my husband and Kendra had been in the building that day, then it hadn't been a random murder. It had been a failed warning, and I had been the original target. I decided to keep the evidence in a sealed envelope, along with the note Lionel had given me. I hid them in the false bottom of a drawer. But that night, someone broke into my apartment. The noise woke me up around 2 in the morning. It was a faint sound, almost imperceptible. The creak of the floorboards in the living room. I got up without turning on the light, barefoot, my heart pounding 1,000 beats a minute. From the darkness, I saw a shadow move near the desk. I couldn't distinguish who it was, but I saw the slender, feminine silhouette, and in their hand, something metallic glistened. A key. I hid behind the door and waited. The shadow opened the drawer, fumbled clumsily, and then hurried out. When I dared to look, the envelope was gone. I went out into the hallway, but no one was there. Only the scent of expensive perfume, the same one Kendra had worn since she married my son. The next morning, I called her. "Kendra, I need to talk to you," I said calmly. "I'm busy right now." "It will be quick. It's about Lionel." There was a silence on the other end of the phone. "What does that man have to do with me?" she asked, her voice tense. "You tell me." She hung up. That night, fear turned into determination. If someone had stolen the evidence, it meant I was right. It meant someone was afraid of what I knew. And that person didn't just want to cover their tracks. They wanted to silence me. I called Ethan again. "I need you to copy the entire system, all the recordings from the last 3 weeks," I asked him. "What's going on, ma'am?" "The same thing that happens when the truth starts to come to light. Fear changes owners." A few hours later, I received an anonymous text message on my cell phone. "Don't look anymore. Your curiosity will kill you, just like Lionel." The number was unknown. I looked at the screen, my hands trembling. I felt a cold current run through my body. I deleted the message and turned off my phone. I stared out the window toward the 8th floor, where the light in Kendra's apartment was still on. Behind that window, I knew someone was watching me too. Someone who was no longer afraid to get their hands dirty. And that night, I made up my mind. If they wanted to silence me, they were going to have to hear me scream first. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It filters in slowly, like water through a crack, until it finally soaks everything. And when it's too late to stop it, you realize that what you thought was your life was actually a stage where others pulled the strings. After the anonymous message, I knew I couldn't trust anyone. Kendra didn't answer my calls. Darius, my son, still didn't suspect a thing, and Lionel was still dead. But in every corner of this house, something told me that his story wasn't over yet. That morning, I went to my husband's study. I hadn't gone in there since his death. The air smelled of old paper and wood. On his desk, covered with a layer of dust, were folders in his unmistakable handwriting. I opened them one by one until I found a sealed envelope with my name on it. "Elara, if something happens to me, find Lionel Evans. He's the only one I trust." A shiver went through me. Everything was connected. Marcus had known him, maybe even worked with him, but on what? Among the documents, I found a thicker folder marked with a name I was beginning to hate. Kendra Reed. Inside were copies of contracts, transfers, and photographs. And there, finally, the truth began to take shape. My husband had discovered before he died that Kendra and her family had used shell companies to siphon money from the family assets. Lionel, who was then working as an auditor, had been his secret collaborator. When Marcus became ill, he wanted to report everything, but he didn't get the chance. He died in a car crash, an accident I was now starting to doubt. Rage coursed through my body like fire. For years, I had believed my husband's death was a cruel twist of fate, but now I understood that someone had pushed him toward that fate. Kendra, the woman who married my son for convenience, the one who smiled while robbing me, the one who perhaps killed my husband and then wanted to get rid of me. My hands trembled. For a moment, hatred blurred my vision, but I took a deep breath. If I learned anything in life, it's that rage without intelligence is a weapon that shoots itself, and I wasn't going to make that mistake. I called Ethan. "I need your help again, son." "Did you find something?" he asked. "Too much, but I can't prove it alone." I asked him to come over that night. He brought his laptop, and together we reviewed the system backups. "Look at this," he said, enlarging one of the recordings. "The night before the murder, someone entered the building manager's office. Can you zoom in more?" Ethan adjusted the image. Kendra's face appeared clearly, illuminated by the computer screen. She was taking out a USB drive and replacing it with an identical one. "She's tampering with the recordings," he whispered. "And not just that," I said. "She's erasing her own trail." I spent the rest of the night sitting in the living room with the lights off, watching the illuminated window on the 8th floor. Kendra still didn't know I had the evidence I needed, and that gave me a small advantage. The problem was Darius. My son continued to defend her blindly. The next morning I called him to talk. "Son, I need you to listen to me without interrupting." "Mom, not again with this." "Your father didn't die in an accident," I said firmly. He paled. "What are you saying?" "I have proof. Documents. Your wife was involved in fraud, and the man who died in the elevator was part of that scheme." "Stop it, Mom," he yelled, standing up. "Don't invent crazy stories." "I'm not inventing anything. She knew Lionel was going to talk. That's why they killed him." "She did? You're delirious." He looked at me furiously, but deep down, I saw something different. Fear that it might be true. That night, Kendra called me. "What did you tell Darius?" she asked in a low, restrained voice. "Only the truth." "You should be careful, mother-in-law. People who stir up the past sometimes end up buried with it." "Is that a threat?" "No, it's advice." And she hung up. I stood there, looking at the phone, trembling. It was the first time she had shown her true face. She no longer bothered to pretend. At midnight, I went down to the mailbox and found an envelope with the same blue ink as the elevator note. Inside was a single sentence. "Don't confront her alone. Wait for my signal." My heart leaped. The handwriting was the same as Lionel's. Was it possible? Could he be alive? I ran up the stairs, the envelope clutched to my chest. If Lionel had survived, it meant everything could still change. And if not, someone was following his plan for him. I didn't sleep that night. Fear was no longer fear. It was fuel. Pain had turned into strategy. And for the first time in a long time, I stopped being the victim. I gathered my husband's documents, Ethan's recordings, and the note. I put everything in a red folder and wrote a phrase on top. "The truth doesn't hide, it waits." I stored the folder in a safe place. I knew Kendra wouldn't stay quiet. I knew she would come for me, and when she did, I would be waiting. When a woman has been betrayed many times, she learns to smile even while digging the trap. And I had been learning all my life. The letter with Lionel's handwriting gave me the momentum I needed. "Don't confront her alone. Wait for my signal." That was the phrase that kept me going. I didn't know if it came from him or from someone following his trail, but the message was clear. I shouldn't rush. I spent the following days planning. It had to be done calmly, without raising suspicion, because if anything characterized Kendra, it was her ability to fake it. She knew how to manipulate, she knew how to lie, and above all, she knew how to hide fear. I decided to host a family dinner. It was something I hadn't done since before Marcus's death. I called Darius with the sweetest voice I could fake. "Son, we haven't had dinner together in a while. I'd like to invite you both over." "Are you sure, Mom? Kendra might not—" "Just tell her it will be a quiet dinner, just family." "Okay, I'll tell her." When I hung up, I took a deep breath. Quiet, I thought. It will be anything but. Before I continue, tell me here in the comments what you think of this story so far and what you would do in my place. Don't leave the video because what comes next will give you goosebumps. Now let's continue. That night, I sat across from the table and observed every detail. White tablecloth, clean glasses, lit candles. Nothing should look out of the ordinary, but under the tablecloth, in a black folder, rested the evidence. The documents my husband had saved, the photos, the recordings, and the copies Ethan had recovered from the system. When I heard the doorbell, my heart leaped. Darius entered first, smiling. Behind him was Kendra in her red dress and that calculated look that always reminded me of a cat watching its prey. "Everything looks so nice, mother-in-law," she said, touching the china with her fingers. "I didn't know you still felt like celebrating anything." "There's always something to celebrate, daughter," I replied, "especially when the masks start to fall off." She smiled. still not understanding. The special guest arrived a few minutes later, Ethan. "And who is this?" Kendra asked, annoyed. "A family friend," I said. "He's been a great help to me lately." Ethan greeted her courteously and sat down next to me. The atmosphere was thick. Darius tried to break the ice with small talk, but the tension could be cut with a knife. We began to eat between bites and stares. I waited for the right moment. When Kendra poured the wine, I saw her hands barely tremble. It was a minimal sign, but for me, it was enough. I knew something was bothering her. Maybe she sensed that she no longer controlled the chessboard. "Darius?" I said aloud, feigning a smile. "Do you remember the man in the elevator?" He nodded uncomfortably. "Why do you bring him up?" "Because I've learned something interesting." I took the black folder from the drawer and placed it on the table. Kendra went pale. "What is that?" she asked. "The truth," I replied. Ethan turned on his laptop and projected an image onto the wall, one of the recovered recordings. It clearly showed Kendra entering the maintenance room, replacing a USB drive. Darius jumped up. "What does this mean?" "It means," I replied, "that someone erased the recordings that could prove who killed Lionel Evans." Kendra tried to stay calm. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you do," I said firmly. "Lionel worked with Marcus, and when your father-in-law discovered your fraud, you silenced him." Silence fell like a hammer blow. Darius put his hands to his head. "Kendra, tell me it's not true." "Of course not," she screamed. "That recording is fake." Ethan looked at her without blinking. "It might be if I didn't also have the financial files she modified and the transfers made in her name." Kendra lost all color. She tried to stand up, but Darius stopped her. "What did you do, Kendra?" She didn't answer. She just started crying, covering her face with her hands. I watched her in silence. I felt neither relief nor triumph, only a deep sadness. I had loved this woman like a daughter, and she had given me poison in return. But justice, though delayed, always arrives. The living room phone suddenly rang. Ethan answered and handed it to me. "For you, ma'am." On the other end, an unknown voice said, "It's done. The file has been delivered. She won't be leaving the country." I hung up without saying a word. Kendra looked at me, terrified. "What did you do?" "Nothing you don't deserve," I replied. "I just returned the favor you gave me in the elevator." Darius, in shock, fell back into his chair. Kendra started screaming at him that everything was a lie, that I was manipulating her, that he would lose everything. But he was no longer listening to her. He just kept repeating, "You killed him. You killed him." She collapsed, crying, and at that moment I knew it was over. That night, when the officers took her away, the entire building came out into the hallway. No one said anything. They just watched as the woman in the red dress was led down the stairs in handcuffs. Ethan approached me and said, "Did you do the right thing, ma'am?" "No," I replied. "I did what was necessary." When they closed the door and silence returned, I looked up at the ceiling, at the cameras, and whispered, "Thank you, Lionel." Because even though I never saw him again, I understood that he was the first piece in a plan that began long before I knew it. 3 days passed since the night of the dinner, 3 days in which I didn't sleep, didn't eat, and barely spoke to anyone. The building, previously full of whispers, now seemed to breathe in silence. No one mentioned Kendra's name, no one dared, but her shadow was still there, floating in the air like a perfume that wouldn't fade. Darius didn't come home. I understood. He needed time to digest that the woman he had shared a decade with had been capable of so much. And I, though I didn't say it aloud, also needed to process that the person who had hurt me the most was still alive and wanted to see me. The call came one afternoon when the sky was turning gray. "Is this Ms. Alara Sterling?" a firm voice asked on the other end. "Yes. Inmate Kendra Reed is requesting a visit from you. She is in preventative custody." "See me for what?" "She says she has something to confess to you." For a moment, I thought about refusing. I owed her nothing, but something inside me urged me to accept. Maybe I needed to hear her say it. Maybe deep down, I wanted to look the monster in the eye and confirm that she had indeed been human once. The detention center smelled of dampness and disinfectant. The echo of the metal doors mingled with the distant murmur of the guards. When they guided me to the visiting room, I saw her behind the glass, pale, disheveled, without makeup. Her gaze, once arrogant, was now an empty pit. For a second I felt pity. Just 1 second. "Thank you for coming," she said, picking up the phone. "I didn't come for you, Kendra," I replied. "I came for the truth." She lowered her gaze and took a deep breath. "I didn't kill Lionel," she said suddenly. I stayed silent. "What? Listen to me. I didn't kill him." "And you expect me to believe that?" "It was Darius." The world seemed to stop. "What are you saying?" I whispered. "Lionel knew things about me, yes, but he also knew things about your son." "No!" I cried. "That's a lie!" "No, Alara. Your son panicked. He thought that if Lionel spoke, the whole family would be stained. He confronted him in the elevator. They fought. The blow was harder than he expected. I arrived afterward." I was paralyzed. Why invent that now? "Because it doesn't suit me to go down alone," she replied, looking at me with a chilling glint in her eyes. The guard knocked on the door, but I asked for a few more minutes. I needed to understand if what I had just heard was one more lie or the missing piece of the puzzle. Kendra continued, her voice almost trembling. "I tried to cover it up. I deleted the recordings, manipulated the files, but it was all for him, Ilara, not for me." "And why confess now?" "Because he won't hesitate to sink you, too. I know him. He's weak. He won't bear the guilt." I stared at her face. There were no tears or remorse, only an unsettling calm, that of someone who knows that their last card can still wreak havoc. "Why did you call me here, Kendra?" I finally asked. "Because I want a deal," she said. "If you help me get out, I promise to give you something your husband left before he died." "What are you talking about?" "A recording. Marcus knew something was going to happen, and he left it with me." "A recording?" "Yes, but if I don't get out of here, no one will ever see it." I looked at her in silence. I knew it could be a trick, another manipulation, but I also knew Kendra never said anything without a purpose. "Where is it?" I asked. She smiled. "Ah, no, darling. First, I want my freedom, then I'll give you the rest." The guard opened the door. "Time's up." Kendra hung up the phone, stood up, and before leaving, she said without looking at me, "If you think you won, you're wrong. Your family is still stained. Lionel only uncovered half of it." I returned home with my mind at war. Her story was absurd, but there was something in her tone, a truth hidden among lies. Darius wasn't answering my calls, and deep down, a horrible fear began to grow. What if Kendra wasn't lying? What if my son really had been there in that elevator? I looked for the folder with the evidence, the photos, the records. I had forgotten one detail. In one of the images from the elevator, right in the reflection of the polished steel, a tall, masculine shadow was visible. It wasn't Lionel, and it wasn't me. That night, before sleeping, I looked at myself in the mirror. My face was tired, but my eyes were still firm. If my son is part of this, I told myself, I will find out. And if not, then Kendra will pay for the last deceit of her life, because the truth, sooner or later, always demands its sacrifice. There are silences that weigh more than any words, silences that are not a pause, but a sentence. And since the visit to the jail, my son Darius's silence became the most unbearable sound in my life. He didn't call me back. He didn't reply to my messages. He didn't even come to see me. For days, I lived between two certainties fighting in my head. One part of me believed his silence was guilt, and the other that it was fear. Fear of what I might know. The truth began to crumble before me little by little, like a wall that has been cracking for years until it suddenly falls. The evidence, the names, the glances, and the elevator recording. I don't know how many times I watched it, but every time I did, a part of me died a little more. In the reflection of the steel behind Lionel, a tall, masculine silhouette was visible. It wasn't sharp, but there was something in the way he moved, in the curve of his shoulders, in the way he tilted his head, something that felt too familiar. I stopped the recording, zoomed in on the image, and I knew. It was Darius. My heart pounded so hard I felt my chest would break. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought my soul would leave my body. Kendra hadn't lied, at least not entirely. That night, the house felt colder than ever. I stayed awake in the living room with the lights off, watching the rain hit the windows. Every drop that fell reminded me of a lie, a betrayal, a word I chose not to hear when I still could have. When Darius was a child, he always came to my bed when he had nightmares. He would curl up beside me and say, "Mama, don't let the man with the dark eyes take me." And I would stroke his hair and whisper, "As long as I'm breathing, no one will hurt you." That night, I realized I hadn't been able to keep that promise. I didn't protect him from the world, and worse, I didn't protect him from himself. Near dawn, the doorbell rang. I jumped. I walked to the door, my heart racing. When I opened it, Darius was there, disheveled, hollow-eyed, with a lost look. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Mom," he said in a whisper, "I need to talk to you." For an instant, I wanted to close the door on him, not because I didn't want to see him, but because I didn't know if I had the strength to listen. But in the end, love is stronger than rage. "Come in," I whispered. He sat on the sofa with his hands clasped. Neither of us spoke for several minutes. All that could be heard was the tick-tock of the clock, marking the distance between who we were and who we would no longer be. "Kendra told you something, didn't she?" he asked at last. "Yes, and I want to hear it from you." He was silent. He took a deep breath, looked at me with red-rimmed eyes. "It was an accident." That short phrase destroyed me. I sank into the chair. I wanted to believe I had misheard, but no. Darius put his hands to his face. "Lionel came looking for me," he said between sobs. "He told me he had proof, that he was going to reveal everything Kendra was doing, that if I didn't cooperate, it would ruin my career, my name, everything." "And what did you do?" "I went to confront him." He recounted waiting for him in the elevator, arguing, how Lionel told him he had information that could sink us all. "I was furious, Mom. I didn't know what to do." "And then?" I asked, barely holding back tears. "He pushed me, and I pushed him back too. He hit his head, he fell, he wasn't moving." His voice broke. I listened to him, paralyzed, as if it weren't my son speaking, as if I were suddenly facing a stranger. "I called Kendra," he continued. "She came right away. She screamed at me, told me to calm down, that she would take care of it." "And what did she do?" "She made me leave the scene. She said she would take care of everything, that no one should know." I closed my eyes, remembering the blood on the elevator floor, Lionel's note, the fear in his gaze, the metallic reflection, the shadow behind. Everything fit. "And why didn't you tell me before?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Because I was scared, Mom. Scared of losing you." "You already lost me, son." The words came out without thinking, and hurt him as much as they hurt me. Darius slumped onto the sofa, crying. I looked at him, not knowing whether to hug him or yell at him. I had before me the boy who was once my pride, my reason for living, and at the same time, the man who had destroyed what little faith I had left. The dawn began to tint the living room a sad color. We remained in silence for a long time. Only the sound of his weeping filled the air. Finally, he said something that disarmed me. "I don't know if God can forgive me, but I want you to." I stared at him. He waited for a response, but I didn't give it right away. Forgiveness. What a huge word. Easy to say when nothing has been lost. But when everything has been lost, it weighs like a stone in the chest. "I can't promise you that," I told him, "but I can try." He got up and hugged me. I felt his body tremble against mine, just like when he was little and had a fever. For an instant, I was his mother again. Only his mother, without judgment, without rage, without fear. But in some corner of my soul, a voice whispered that love shouldn't blind me again, because if I truly loved him, I had to let him face what he did. We separated in silence. "Kendra manipulated you," I told him. "But that doesn't absolve you." "I know," he whispered, "and that's why I'm turning myself in." "What?" "I already spoke to a lawyer. I want to confess. I can't keep living with this." My legs trembled. "Don't do it." "I have to. Mom, you taught me that mistakes aren't hidden, they are faced." "Not like this. There's no other way." His eyes were full of tears, but also a peace I hadn't seen in years, and I understood that I could no longer stop him. That night, after he left, the house fell silent again. A new, different silence. It wasn't the silence of guilt or sadness. It was the silence before the final judgment. I sat in front of the portrait of Marcus, my husband. I spoke to him in a low voice, as if he could hear me. "Honey, he's going to turn himself in. He says he wants to do it for dignity." In the darkness, Marcus's face seemed to look at me with a mix of compassion and serenity. I closed my eyes, and for an instant, I felt his voice. "Don't destroy your son, Alara. Let him save himself through his own guilt." I cried. I cried with all my soul because I understood that a mother's love is not measured by how much she protects, but by how much she lets go. The next morning, the phone rang. It was the case agent. "Ms. Sterling, we found something you should hear." I went to the precinct. In a small room, they showed me a recording recovered from Kendra's files. When they played it, Marcus's voice filled the room. "If you're listening to this, Alara, it's because everything went wrong. Kendra is not who she seems. But if something happens to me, don't seek revenge. Look after Darius. He's not evil. He's blind. Don't let hate sink him further than he already is. If you ever have to choose between the truth and your son, choose to save his soul." I covered my mouth to keep from screaming. Tears blurred my vision. Marcus had known. He had seen the storm coming, and yet he tried to save us all. I returned home with my soul in pieces. Darius was waiting for me at the door, his eyes swollen, his gaze resigned. "I've decided, Mom," he said. "I'm going to turn myself in." "Yes, I can't keep running. I don't want my life to be another lie." We hugged in silence. I felt his heart beat against mine, desperate, and I knew there was no turning back. "Whatever you do," I whispered in his ear, "do it with dignity." He pulled away, kissed my forehead, and left. I watched him walk down the hallway without looking back, and in that instant, I understood that sometimes the purest love consists of letting children pay for their own mistakes. That night, the rain returned. The sound of water against the windows was like a sad but serene melody. I lit a candle and sat in front of Marcus's portrait. "I looked after him, honey," I told him, "as you asked, but I also let him go." The flame flickered softly as if responding to me, and then I understood everything. Redemption does not always come with glory or with absolution. Sometimes it arrives in silence, in the form of surrender, in the acceptance that no one escapes their own shadow. I got up, opened the window, and let the cool air of dawn in. I breathed deeply. For the first time in a long time, I felt peace because I understood that forgiveness doesn't erase the pain, but it allows you to live without being consumed by it. And that night, while the city slept, I realized that I, too, was ready to start anew. They say the truth always arrives late, but what no one tells you is what to do when it finally comes. Because when the truth knocks on the door, it doesn't bring relief. It brings consequences. The morning after Darius turned himself in, I woke up with a strange feeling. It wasn't sadness or relief. It was as if for the first time in years, my soul had room to breathe. However, the peace was incomplete because I still needed to understand what had really happened in that elevator, why Lionel had left me that note, and why, even after death, I still felt like he was protecting me. That afternoon, while tidying Marcus's desk, I found a small metal keychain with the name Evans engraved on the back. It was so simple that at first I didn't pay attention to it, but something inside me made me turn it over. On the inside was a tiny slot. I inserted a needle and a hidden cover sprang open. Inside was a memory card. I turned on the computer. There was a single file with no name. I clicked it. The screen filled with a blurry recording taken with a security camera. My husband, Marcus, appeared sitting in his office. Next to him was a young man in his 40s with a sparse beard and tired eyes. It was Lionel Evans. "Marcus, if something happens to me, I want this recording to reach my wife. She needs to know the truth." "Lionel, are you sure, Mr. Sterling? If this comes out, your daughter-in-law won't be the only one involved." "Marcus, I know, but I can't keep quiet anymore. Kendra isn't alone." "Lionel, there's someone else? Who?" "Marcus," he sighed. "My son. Darius signed documents without knowing what he was doing. She used him. But if this continues, it will end up ruining his life. If you can protect Alara and him, please do it, Lionel." "Lionel, I'll do what I can, but if something happens to you, they'll know it was her." "Marcus, and if I die, tell Alara it wasn't an accident." The video cut off. I stared at the screen for several minutes, unable to move. Lionel had been my husband's guardian, and then mine. He knew what was about to happen, and left me that note, not only to save me from Kendra, but also from my own son. That night, I went back to the condo building. I needed to look at that place one last time. The manager allowed me in, although they had already sealed it off. The hallway was empty. The lights flickered with a soft hum. The elevator remained closed, but the dry blood still marked the floor like a scar. I knelt in front of the door and leaned my forehead against the cold metal. "Thank you, Lionel," I whispered, because now I understood everything. 10 minutes after he handed me the note, when I ran out of there pretending to be sick, he didn't go down alone. I replayed the scene in my mind as if it were happening again. The elevator closed. Lionel was inside. Darius, nervous, waited for him below. They argued. Lionel tried to protect me and warn him. Darius, blinded by fear, pushed him. Lionel fell, and when Kendra arrived, it was already too late. She took advantage of the tragedy to erase evidence, manipulate recordings, and eliminate traces. And all that time I, blinded by rage, hated her without knowing that deep down she had only covered up my own son's sin. The next day dawned under a gray sky. I received a call from the prosecutor. "Ms. Sterling, your son partially confessed. He said it was an accident, that there was no intent. And what will happen to him? The judge will decide, but his statements helped clarify the corruption network. Thanks to you, the case will close with justice." I hung up the phone without saying anything. Justice. What an empty word when everything has already been lost. The following weeks were a parade of journalists, lawyers, and curious neighbors. The building filled with rumors. Some said there was a curse, others that the old woman on the 7th floor, me, was a vengeful witch. I learned not to listen. People always seek entertainment in the pain of others. But one morning, when I went down to the mailbox, I found an envelope with no sender's address. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Thank you for believing in me until the end." I couldn't help but smile. It was his handwriting, trembling, hurried, but unmistakable. I didn't know if he had left it before he died or if someone had placed it there on his behalf, but deep down it didn't matter. It was the closure I needed. In time, Darius was sentenced to a reduced term. The judge considered that there was no intent to kill. I attended the trial every day, sitting in the back row, not to judge him, but to support him, although he didn't always dare to look at me. During his final statement, he said something that made me cry. "I don't ask for clemency. I only want my mother to know that everything I am, the good and the bad, I learned from her." And for the first time in months, I smiled, because in the midst of so much pain, those words were my redemption. When he was released from prison, 2 years later, he came to see me. He had aged, but his eyes held a new, humble light. We hugged for a long time. We didn't talk about the past. It was no longer necessary. Forgiveness had ceased to be a word and had become a place where both of us could breathe. "And what will you do now?" I asked him. "Leave," he replied. "Start somewhere else, but this time without lies." And Kendra filed for divorce from jail. "I don't want to hear from her again." I nodded in silence. As he left, I watched him walk down the building hallway, just like the night he turned himself in. Only now, he wasn't running away. He was seeking to live again. Months passed. The building, once filled with shadows, began to fill with life. New neighbors, children laughing in the hallways, flowers in the windows. I also started going out more. I returned to gardening, reading in the park, and watching the sunsets without feeling guilt. One afternoon, while pruning my rose bushes, a young woman approached me. She had brown hair and light eyes. "Are you Miss Sterling?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Lionel Evans's daughter." I was speechless. "My father talked about you a lot," she said with a shy smile. "He always said that if anything happened to him, I should come and thank you." "Thank me?" "Yes, because he said you represented what he never had, a clean conscience." Her voice trembled. I stroked her cheek. "No, honey, it was the other way around. He taught me not to give up." She handed me a small box. This was his. He kept it with your name on it. Inside was a silver pendant with an inscription. 10 minutes can change a life. And then I understood everything. Lionel had known that those 10 minutes between the moment he handed me the note and his death would be the breaking point of my story. 10 minutes to get out of the elevator, save myself, and start uncovering everything. That night, I lit a candle for him and for Marcus, and for all the silences that had ended in screams. I sat by the window, looking at the city lights, and thought about what we had lived through. How life can be twisted by a single decision, how love and guilt can get confused, and how, in spite of everything, there is always a way to find redemption. Sometimes people ask me if I regret uncovering this whole story. I tell them no, because the truth hurts, yes, but lies poison slowly. And I prefer a clean wound to a life rotten with secrets. My son now lives far away. He calls me every week. He has a different voice, calmer, more serene. Sometimes he sends me letters, always signed the same way, "Your son, who learned to tell the truth." And every time I read them, I feel that in some way, Marcus and Lionel also rest in peace. Today, as I write these last lines, the sun comes through the window. The building elevator is working again. No one fears it anymore. Sometimes I hear the children playing near it, laughing without knowing all that the place once hid. I watch them from my balcony with a hot cup of tea in my hands and think that perhaps life is just that, an elevator going up and down, taking us through moments we think are eternal, until someone leaves us a note that changes the course. I smile, close my eyes, and whisper, "Thank you, Lionel. Thank you, Marcus. Thank you, life." Because 10 minutes later, I understood that it's not about how much pain we can endure, but about how much love we are capable of preserving after losing everything. They say that when a woman reaches a certain age, she no longer fears anything. That's not true. She just learns to fear differently. She no longer fears pain or loneliness. She fears forgetting who she was. I, Elara Sterling, went through the deepest darkness a mother can imagine. I saw a good man die. I discovered betrayal in my own home, and I understood that love, the kind we believe is eternal, can also become a weapon if used incorrectly. For years I thought life had taken too much from me, but now I know that it was actually giving me back what was essential: the truth, even though it hurts, freedom, even though it took time, and peace, even if it arrived in silence. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering without the memory destroying you. And when you achieve that, when you can look back without resentment, then life finally returns your smile. Sometimes I wake up in the dead of night and stare out the window. The building sleeps. The elevator lights flicker gently, and I think that somewhere Lionel and Marcus are still watching over me. Perhaps they are smiling too, knowing that their sacrifice was not in vain. My son Darius now lives far away. We write letters every week. There are no reproaches, just simple, human, sincere words, because we both learned that the truth, however cruel, unites more than any well-spoken lie. And if I can leave you anything today, you who are listening to my story, it is this lesson. Don't let fear silence you. Don't let the guilt of others steal your voice. And above all, don't confuse love with obedience. True love never forces you to give up who you are. Sometimes all it takes is a note, a gesture, or a simple fake sick to change the course of an entire life. And though the past cannot be rewritten, you can learn to tell it without tears. And now, before I say goodbye, I want to make a special invitation. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and leave a like if this story touched your heart. This helps me see that you are keeping me company, that you are listening to me, and that I am not walking alone on this journey of memories and scars. And please comment below, telling me what city you are watching from. I'd love to read it, to know where your voice is coming from, because every story, every comment is proof that there are still people who feel, who cry, and who believe in the power of the truth. I'm Alara Sterling, and this was my story, a story of pain, redemption, and true love. Thank you for listening. Thank you for staying until the end. And remember, the truth may be late, but it always arrives. Yeah.